I'm going to show how to use this tool to create a web scraping script. And for this website, what we're going to do is we're going to scrape data about a few different recipes on the page. So we'll start with the first recipe. And so let's say I want to get the text for this recipe, as well as and print that out, as well as click to navigate to the page. So let me use this class card underline. So we'll do await page $, and then put this selector in there. So what you can see now is that this selector is being highlighted on the page anywhere that appears with this blue border. And so we're going to call this recipe element. And so we are going to now get the text on it. So let's say recipe name equals await recipe element dot. And so we're going to evaluate a client-side JavaScript function on this element. So we're going to get the text content of this element, and then we're going to print it out. So let's run that and see what happens. So as you can see, the recipe name beef tacos was printed out here at the bottom. Okay, so just something to point out here, you can see this yellow squiggly here. It says selector card underline is not unique. And so that's because it's matching all these different elements on the page that have this blue border. For now, this is fine, but something to consider later on. It's fine right now because the single $sign is specifically selecting the first element on the page, matching that selector. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to click on this first element. And so let me take recipe element again and say await recipe element dot, and we're going to call evaluate on it again. And we're going to say element dot click. And so this will get us to the next page. So let's run that and see. Okay, so we're on the next page now. Just want to point out something here again. So if we go to the right side of the page, we have the snapshots view. And so what you can see here is that for the current line of code, line 10, before line 10 was run, this is what the page looked like. It had all the recipes on it. And after the line was run, we have just this, we have the recipes page in particular, beef tacos. And so this view kind of helps you see for a particular line of code what it looked like. So if I instead go to line 5 and hit enter, you can see here that this selector was highlighted here on the page, and you can see what the page looked like before and after line 5. Okay, so what we're going to do now that we're on this recipe page is we're going to get the number of ratings that this recipe has. So let me come over here and get the ID for this element. And so it's an ID, and we're going to put that in there. And so as you can see, again, the element is being highlighted. So we're going to say ratings element. And so now we want to get the text for it. So we're going to get ratings element dot evaluate, similar to above. And then we're going to print this out. So let's run this. And another thing to point out here is that if a line is printing out text, you can see it down here in this console, in this terminal, but it's also over here in the snapshots view. So for line 14, the console output here was 17 ratings. Okay, so our script looks good for this recipe. What we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the events, to the full recipes page. And then we're going to loop through the different recipes on the page and do the same thing that we just did here. So let's add a loop here. We're going to do this for the first 3 recipes. And so we have to make a couple changes here. One is that this line of code right here was selecting the first element on the page with the selector. What we want to do now actually is we want to select the ith element on the page. So let's edit our code a bit here. And so let's say recipe elements equals page $. And so we'll then create a new variable recipe element that's equal to recipe elements of I. Okay, let's see if this code works. So we go to the beef tacos page, print out the number of ratings. And then we go to Hawaiian spam tacos and print out that text. But there's an error on the page. So what's happening? We see this error cannot read evaluate of null. So we do see that the recipe name was printed out. We see Hawaiian spam tacos. But we see that line 15, we have this error, can't evaluate of null. So what's happening here in line 14 is that we have this error, selector aggregate star rating cannot be found at this point in execution for iterations I. So to find out a bit more about what that means, we can look at the snapshots here on the right. And we can see that we have the beef tacos page, we have the Hawaiian spam tacos page. And so for beef tacos, remember we have this ratings text, but for Hawaiian spam tacos, we actually don't have any ratings text here, interestingly. So this is why the code isn't working, because that element doesn't exist here. The snapshots view is helpful. It might be helpful if you want to compare what the result looks like for different iterations of the code. So this is iteration 1, iteration 0, and iteration 1. And you can also inspect the page if you want to, using the dev tools down here. And so that just in general, these might be some helpful features for understanding what the script looks like at different points in its execution and across different pages.